Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our event, Roundtable Discussion, Indonesia-Australia Trade and Investment Initiative. Let me introduce myself. I'm Sesa, who will be the Master of Ceremony for the Indonesia venue. And later, we will greet Mr. Andrew Mendelowitz, Master of Ceremony for the venue in Melbourne, Australia, as well the main MC for today's event. First of all, I would like to express our gratitude for the speakers, moderators, and our distinguished guests from the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs and Ministry of Industry of Indonesia. Thank you for attending this event. Next, I would like to welcome Mr. Tano Tanubrata as the CEO of BDO in Indonesia, and to the management, partners, and directors of BDO in Indonesia. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, this roundtable event is a collaboration event between BDO in Indonesia and BDO in Australia. So besides being held at Ayana MidPlaza Hotel Jakarta, this event is also being held in Melbourne, Australia. Moreover, this event is also broadcasted via Microsoft Teams so that participants who cannot attend in person can still take part in this event via online platform. Before we get into the main event, let's first listen to the safety briefing from the Ayana MidPlaza Hotel team to Bapak Ilham Shah. Please get onto the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Ayana MidPlaza Jakarta. On this occasion, I will glad to give you short safety briefing. At present, you are in Jasmine 1 and 2. This building is equipped by fire protection system. In the case of emergency, we will activate alarm and continue to throw the public speaker address. Our response team will direct you to assembly point on the first floor. You can use the exit door over there. Our toilet position in the front of escalator. And you can use the smoking area in the front of lobby hotel, outside of lobby hotel. For more information, this morning we do not doing a fire drill. Thank you for your kind attention and good morning.
Thank you to Bapak Ilham Shah from Ayana Hotel MidPlaza for the briefing. Before we connect with BDO Australia, I would like everyone to please rise and sing together to our national anthem, Indonesia Raya.
Indonesia kebangsaan
So, ladies and gentlemen, please, in every table in front of you, please find there is a QR code on your table to submit question regarding today's discussion. So please feel free to submit any question. Well, we will immediately connect with BDO Australia via Microsoft Teams and start today's event. So please welcome and enjoy.
Indonesia is one of the biggest and most populous countries in the world. Thousands of islands spread from west to east offering their cultural diversity, uniqueness, and abundant natural resources. In the last decade, the economy of Indonesia has grown swiftly supported by infrastructure development. These make Indonesia a potential market for local as well as foreign organizations. The question is, how we can maximize this opportunity? That's why we are here for you. With our extensive experience as a member firm which was founded in 1979 before finally appointed by BDO International as member firm in 1992, BDO in Indonesia commits to provide cohesive and complete support in multiple disciplines across borders and cultures. Audit and assurance. We provide excellent audit and assurance services through our more than 500 professionals. Through our global network, we are able to leverage the expertise of our foreign counterparts in supporting you on your cross-border transactions. Tax. We provide tax advisory services to local enterprises, public listed and multinational companies, as well as individuals. Our tax specialists are aligned to a focused range of industries which enables us to identify factors that help you in achieving your business goals. Advisory. Our services are built to help our clients with a diverse range of needs in navigating exceptional challenges, changes, and opportunities. Our professionals are drawn from various backgrounds, allowing us to deliver insightful, creative, and innovative solutions. Business services and outsourcing. Our service can be tailored to meet client-specific needs. No matter the size and ambition of your operations, we can help you to manage your accounting and compliance burdens to leave you free to focus on your business goals. BDO in Indonesia will always strive to provide excellent services to clients. To realize that vision, we will continue to expand our branches in big cities in Indonesia. Wherever you are, we'll be there for you. In BDO, we believe delivering excellent service to clients starts with how we treat our employees. Here, we encourage collaboration in an atmosphere of trust and professionalism. We also facilitate our employees to develop their skills through training and activities on a regular basis.
I believe the quality of services that we present to our clients is important. However, what makes BDO Indonesia different from our competitors is the way we treat our clients. Our tagline, "Because relationships matter," always become our guideline to serve you not only as our client, but also as our partners.
Australia, and I welcome you on behalf of Tano Tanabrato, who is the Office Managing Partner in Jakarta, and myself to this event. Our purpose today is to understand the opportunities, efforts so far, and future endeavours for economic cooperation and growth between Indonesia and Australia. In doing this, we're aided by a range of eminent speakers from both industry and government, and I'm very grateful to all the participants. We have in the Melbourne office a range of academics, business people. We also have the presence of the Consul General of Indonesia, Kunkoro Wasiso, and I welcome him and his entourage today, and I'm very grateful for your attendance. In moving through our schedule, and we have a number of speakers, the approach will be multimedia, so we'll obviously live cast between the various officers involved. We'll have recorded speeches for those who can't join us, and we'll have live commentary. In order to coordinate all of this, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Mr. Andrew Mendelowitz. Andrew is an eminent business person in the Melbourne and Perth commercial environments. He has experience in pharmaceutical, mining, and a range of international businesses. He's also the Honorary Consul for the Republic of Guatemala and the Secretary for Consular Services in Victoria. I would ask Andrew to take the podium at this point and lead us forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bill. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon to all of the people here in Melbourne, in Sydney, and around Australia. Good morning to everyone in Indonesia and anywhere else they might be beaming in from the west coast of my centre in Australia. Again, I'd also like to acknowledge the presence of all the very many speakers, VIPs and VVIPs over here. In front of me, I have His Excellency, the Consul General of Indonesia, Kunkoro Wasiso. I'd also like to acknowledge before we kick off, because it can get lost in all the work that's done to coordinate this event. There has been so many speakers, there's so many different concepts, and you know, it's really great to see. I've been asked to say some opening remarks, and given the calibre of the people that I've seen that are on the bill, I thought rather than say some opening remarks, I'd say some obvious remarks. Indonesia is so close to us, and it's been there for a long, long time. Me coming from Perth, around 3,000 kilometres away from Jakarta. If you look at Sydney, 3,200 kilometres away, which gives you a little bit of perspective. But me, in my business career, I've even worked in the north of Brazil, which involves a flight from Perth to Sydney to Buenos Aires to Sao Paulo to Belém and up into the north, 60, 70 kilometres of hours of travelling rather than our nearest station. Australia is Indonesia's 11th principal export destination, and Australia is the 8th import source. So clearly there's some room for improvement. And the room for improvement could come now. Clearly the macro environment has changed a lot in the last few years. Firstly, we went through COVID and we've become experts in Zoom meetings and muting our mics and making sure that we're actually wearing clothes when the lights turn on. We've had changes in our relationship and sustainability with different countries. The relationship with China has changed, of course. Our logistics and supply chains have been materially affected, obviously. And we've had other things happen, such as the war in Ukraine, the Abraham's Accords being signed in Israel, which has seen completely different relationships change with those countries. And so it presents another time to look at the Australia-Indonesia relationship and see what else we can do. The Australian economy is the 13th biggest in the world, $1.3 trillion. The Indonesian economy is just a couple of places behind, just a little bit smaller. Together, they would represent the 8th biggest economy in the world together, just behind France, which gives you a bit of perspective of what that little block can do, is doing at the moment. And when you look at Indonesia becoming in the top 10 economies in the world in the next 10 years, and number 4th economy in the world by 2050, imagine what would happen if the integration between Australia and Indonesia was really solid and went up to another level. Now, I can't answer those questions, but we've got the people here today. It gives me great pleasure to be here. It gives me great pleasure to be a student of this relationship. So I'd like to pass you over to offer the introductory welcome speech, the BDO Sydney's BDO CEO, Tama Tuanabrata. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I, on behalf of BDO in Indonesia and Australia, would like to express our greatest gratitude to all parties for supporting today's event. Special thanks to Mr. Erlangga Hartarto as the Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs of Indonesia and Mr. Agus Gumiwang Kartasasmita as the Minister of Industry of Indonesia. Thank you for giving the speech for this event, which we will be listening to in a moment. Our honorable guest, the representative of Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs of Indonesia and Ministry of Industry of Indonesia, thank you for the support and attending today's event. We also would like to express our gratitude for all the speakers here in Indonesia. Mr. George Marantika, as the National President of Indonesia Australia Business Council. Mr. Iwi Sumbada, President of PT Sekar Laut Tbk. Ms. Sinta Melody, as the representative of Indonesian Young Entrepreneurs Association, HIPMI, and Mr. Afan Alamudi, Senior Advisor to the Minister of Industry of Indonesia, will also act as the moderator to lead discussions in Indonesia. And of course, in Australia, Mr. Kunchoro Waseso, the Consul General for Victoria and Tasmania, Ms. Helen Brown as the representative of Australia-Indonesia Centre, and representative of Australian companies who will share their experiences in doing business. Is Mr. Lean McCook from Ronstan, Mr. Ferry Wijaya from Gaura Chocolate, and Regina Karim from H&H Group. And special thanks also to Professor Susan Freeman for being the moderator to lead discussions in Australia. Today, BDO in Indonesia and Australia are collaborating to present an insightful event, Indonesia-Australia Trade and Investment Initiative. This event will be conducted simultaneously in Indonesia, in Australia, as well as online using Microsoft Teams. As one of the world's largest network of public accounting, tax, and advisory firms in the world, BDO is committed to support companies in conducting international business and supported by the representatives of 164 countries around the world. We are ready to assist your business in dealing with issues with international trade. Ladies and gentlemen, in the context of business relations between Indonesia and Australia, there have been many positive things that have intertwined. However, we realize that there are still a lot of potential aspects that can be maximized. Thus, to identify the gaps in the relations between both parties, to improve collaborations, and open up new opportunities for businesses in both countries, BDO in Indonesia and Australia collaborated to organize this event. We really hope that the discussions and sharing from the experts and practitioners present in today's event, both in Indonesia and Australia, can give you new insights and even inspire you in doing your business. We also hope that there will be new business cooperation intertwined between businessmen present at this event. And for all the other business who plan to expand their business abroad or currently facing issues in your business, our experts at BDO, we are spread across the countries in the world and we are ready to help you. That is all for me. Thank you very much and enjoy the event.
Very much for that. Thank you very much for that work, Ricardo. Our next speaker is Elanga Atato, the Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs in Indonesia, who's been kind enough to record a speech for us today.
Good morning, CEO of BDO Indonesia, Mr. Tanu Brata, Industry Minister, Bapak Agus Gumiwang Kartasasmita, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you, BDO, for organizing the roundtable discussion, Indonesia-Australia Trade and Investment Initiative. I'm honored to provide you with a picture of Indonesia's most recent economic development as part of ongoing effort to elevate Indonesia's strategic partnership and to further attract investment for Indonesia. Indonesia and Australia are great partners. We have similar goals but different strengths and weaknesses. In other words, we are a natural partner. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia has more than 270 million population, 69% of the productive age group, and Indonesia also a major economy in Southeast Asia with a market more than 650 million population. Indonesia represents 40% of Southeast Asia population and 35% of its GDP. Access to Indonesia means that being present in one of the world's most regional, politically stable and economically dynamic. Investors should consider Indonesia as a market for production base as well as for export hub. The global economy is projected to slow down in 2023. However, Indonesian consumption is still strong and export and investment have performed very well in the year 2022. In 2023, Indonesia economic prospects are still optimistic but remain vigilant. At the end of last year, Indonesia has decided to do a reform through omnibus law of Cipta Kerja through the government regulation in lieu of law. We hope that this policy will encourage Indonesia economic activity as well as the government are ending the PPKM. It means that Indonesia is encourage people mobility to boost the economic activity this year. Ladies and gentlemen, Government is focusing on deregulation and especially to provide more easy and transparent investment license process, the structural reform through the job creation law and its regulation hopefully will provide certain legal certainty to the business people. More than 3.3 million of new business identification number has been issued by the online single submission, and Indonesia also issued investment priorities, and the priority industry will receive fiscal and non-fiscal incentive, and Indonesia also establishing the investment authority or sovereign wealth fund as an alternative for financing the economic development. Indonesia also committed to build downstream industry to increase the value added and for more natural resources commodities. And also Indonesia would like to encourage the development of the auto industry, including electric vehicle ecosystem within the industry. Australia is an important partner for Indonesia, especially in the production of EV through availability of lithium mine in Australia, one of the main component of electric battery. We hope that Indonesia's synergy with Australia can provide an excellent mutual beneficiary development of EV industry, especially on the battery production. To expand the market access, Indonesia will continue doing trade cooperation through the IA-SEPA, and we hope this partnership will increase the trade value between the two countries, as well as providing investment. Indonesia and 4 other countries, including Australia, also currently discussing through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity Forum. The forum raised in 4 focuses: trade, supply chain, clean economy, and fair economy. We do hope that all country cooperation will be support the economic growth in the region, and the economic growth will be based on sustainability of development in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, Australia has been Indonesia's strategic partner, especially to promote the economic growth as well as the green growth for 2 countries. Investment from Australia around 524 million last year, and that was the largest foreign investment in Indonesia, mainly are in the mining sectors. The contribution plays a significant role in creating industry as well as employing the Indonesian people as a workforce. Meanwhile, the total trade between Indonesia and Australia in 2022 achieved 13.3 billion, or grew 9.1% over the last 5 years. The share of import from Australia reached close to 5% to total Indonesian import in the same year, and the percentage of Australian import from Indonesia is around 1.4%. Indonesia main export and import commodity to Australia are petroleum oils, TV monitor, projectors, coal and wheat. Trade and investment have been the 2 nations' potential to be increased, and I believe economic collaboration still have plenty of room to grow. Ladies and gentlemen, the economic collaboration between Indonesia and Australia should achieve its potential. So I think the investment is one of the key part of this collaboration. We should strengthen our partnership, and Indonesia remains steadfast in promoting the collaboration with Australia in this region. Thank you.
We're moving now from the Ministry of Economic Affairs to the Ministry of Indonesia, Ministry of Industry of Indonesia, sorry. Please give welcome to Agus Guriwan Katasamita.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Honorable Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs of Indonesia, CEO of BDO, Indonesia and BDO in Australia, distinguished guests. First of all, let us praise and thank you for the presence of Allah Almighty, for the abundance of grace and joy, and that all of us can still gather on this beautiful occasion. Allow me to begin by conveying my highest appreciation for BDO, Indonesia and Australia, for hosting today's roundtable discussion, Indonesia-Australia Trade and Investment Initiatives. And I would like to welcome and extend my greetings to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Indonesian government representatives in Australia, and representatives of Indonesian and Australian business communities. This occasion is a great opportunity for us to discuss the challenges and investment opportunities that will be faced in 2023, including the policy strategies for taking advantage of opportunities to boost national industry. Ladies and gentlemen, opening this discussion, allow me to reiterate President Joko Widodo's message that the year 2023 will be a year full of opportunities as well as challenges, a year of strengthening the national economy and global economic recovery, accompanied by the potential for a financial crisis, a decline in exports, and a food crisis. We need to anticipate a recession through a policy-making strategy that can increase investment, which is considered to be closely related to job creation, which is currently very much needed in the country. Indonesian government will continue to consistently carry out downstream industries to increase national economic growth. The Ministry of Industry continues to encourage the performance of the manufacturing industry as the main sector of Indonesia's economic development. Currently, the downstream industry is one of the strategic policies that we have implemented, specifically in three sectors, which are agro-based industries, mining and mineral-based industries, and also oil, gas, and coal-based industries. Along with the economic recovery, some opportunities are becoming increasingly visible, both at the global and domestic level. Another opportunity that will help the economic recovery in 2023 is the improvement in the price level of Indonesia's main commodities on the global market, as well as expanding market access as a result of the cooperation that we have built together. The first opportunity to increase investment can be seen in manufacturing activities within developed and developing countries, which are entering the expansionary phase. Increased manufacturing activity also occurs in Indonesia, which has been driven by increased domestic industrial utilization. This indicates optimism in the business sector for future economic conditions. Indonesia also shows signs of improvement, where the manufacturing industry is the main driver of our country's economic growth, which contributes 16.48% of total national GDP in the year of 2022 and grows impressively to reach 5.01% year-on-year. This performance was partly driven by the export performance of the non-oil and gas manufacturing industry, which is increased by 16.45% compared to 2021, with a total export value of $206.35 billion or 70.15% of all national exports. Indonesia's leading export commodities to Australia include nitrogenous mineral or chemical fertilizers, monitors and projectors, new monamic tires and rubber, footwear, plywood. Meanwhile, Australia's leading export commodities to Indonesia include wheat and muslin, live cattle and frozen meat, iron ore, iron waste, scrap, milk, and also cream. Next, on the investment realization in the manufacturing sector, 2022 was 497.7 trillion rupiah. That is the highest value compared to 2019 to 2021. The increase in industrial investment has impacted on the increasing employment rate in the year of 2022, reaching about 19.4 million people. Moreover, Australian investment in Indonesia reached $2.35 billion, and in the period of Q1 until Q3 2022, Australian investment in Indonesia reached $344 million compared to the year 2021, which reached $195 million. Distinguished guests, another opportunity that must be taken advantage of is international trade activities that are increasingly integrated through RCEP agreement widely by all 10 ASEAN countries and 5 major trade partners, and Indonesia-Australia CEPA cooperation. We can take advantage of this trade agreement and cooperation as an opportunity to boost export performance and improve Indonesia's position in the global value chain, also to increase competitiveness and increase foreign direct investment inflow. One of the Indonesia-Australia partnership project on food security in the red meat and cattle sector. The project proposal focuses on the strengthening and the development of the ecosystem of Indonesian beef byproduct industry with the target of developing the processing of byproducts from the beef industry. Currently, Indonesia has entered Industrial Revolution 4.0 and expected that the red meat and cattle partnership project can be connected digitally between upstream and downstream. In addition, it was also conveyed that Indonesia needs to have a sustainable meat supply, increase production in the upstream sector, and carry out downstream development, especially processing red meat waste, considering that currently Indonesia has started to focus on zero waste and a circular economy. So this is a good opportunity to see the potential for the industrial processing of waste generated from slaughtering cows to be processed into raw materials for the poultry feed industry. Indonesian government's optimism in taking advantage of these economic recovery opportunities is based on an economic recovery strategy through policies and programs that have been prepared by the government and in synergy with all stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, Australia offers advantages in terms of technology and industry expertise, as well as the market for industrial goods. By forging partnership with Australian business people, hopefully Indonesia can access the latest technologies and resources that will increase our competitiveness in international markets. Through this cooperation between Indonesia and Australia, we hope both countries mutually benefit and together promote sustainable economic growth. Aligned with this cooperation, we need strong coordination between the governments of both countries, the commercial sector, and also academic institutions. I invite all of us to stay in synergy and maintain the spirit of national economic recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenge of 2023 recession. Joint efforts are needed to seek breakthroughs during the current situation. Therefore, let us take advantage of this momentum together to carry out the economic transformation towards a better regional and global economy. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Now we are going to have an Australian perspective. I'd like to welcome to the virtual stage Renee Bryant, the Acting Director of Indonesian Trade and Economic Section, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade.
Thank you, and I hope that you can all hear me. So I will rely on there being no indications otherwise. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm calling from today here in Canberra. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. As with previous speakers, I would love to acknowledge the speech delivered by both ministers, the Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Erlangga Hartarto, and the Minister for Industry, Agus Gumiwang Kartasasmita. I'd also like to acknowledge on behalf of DFAT the Indonesian Consul General for Victoria and Tasmania, Kunchoro Waseso, and representatives from the Indonesian ministries here today, the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs and the Ministry of Industry. I'd also like to acknowledge the Indonesia CEO of BDO, Mr. Tano Tubrata, and of course Bill Cole, whose efforts have led us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Bapak-Bapak, Ibu-Ibu, it's a pleasure to speak to you today and at this juncture, and I'd like to note the importance of advisory firms like BDO in helping facilitate the greater trade and investment that links between Australia and Indonesia that I think we're all here striving for. I'm also pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you all today, in particular the Australian businesses in the room, to share some government perspectives on how we see things in the bilateral trade and economic relationship. As you all know, revitalising our trade and investment relationship with Indonesia is a priority for the government, and there's a lot of evidence to be optimistic about Indonesia's economic trajectory. Its economy weathered the impacts of COVID-19 and is growing at an average rate of about 5%. And by 2040, Indonesia is projected to have more households with an annual disposable income in excess of $35,000 than Australia or indeed anywhere else in Southeast Asia. But as other speakers have mentioned today, it is also a universal trait that Australia prioritises its relationships with our neighbours, and Neighbours are obviously those that we grow up with, those that we rely first on in a crisis, and neighbours will be sticking with us long into the future. Since this government came into office, around 16 Australian ministers have visited Indonesia, some more than once, and I can speak from personal experience that this frequency of visits is not going to slow down anytime soon. It's a real priority for Australian ministers, and that's really come down to all levels of government. Australia and Indonesia have a long history of cooperation and friendship, but we all want to deepen the economic relationship. The Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership, ISEPA, serves as a solid foundation to achieve this objective, building on the other regional agreements that both our countries are part of. ISEPA negotiations were, of course, launched in 2011 by former Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono with former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. It entered into force in 2020, and this is an agreement that prioritises genuine partnership and cooperation alongside new market access for both countries, as well as other outcomes in trade facilitation to benefit both countries. ISEPA bolsters our strategic partnership and delivers outcomes for both our countries across goods and services trade, as well as investment. ISEPA also signals to the rest of the world and the region that even in challenging times, both Australia and Indonesia are committed to free, fair and open trade. The visit to Indonesia by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in June, accompanied by Foreign Minister Penny Wong, Trade and Tourism Minister Don Farrell and Industry and Science Minister Ed Husic, gave the new Australian government an opportunity to establish solid positive relationships with President Widodo and his team. The Prime Minister came to listen and learn about Indonesia's priorities and how the Australian government could add momentum to a relationship where commercial linkages, I think it's fair to say, have withered in recent decades. In attendance was also a delegation of senior Australian business leaders. So they too had the chance to familiarise themselves with a modern Indonesian business environment and the opportunities that are available. During the visit, the government announced a series of packages and measures to respond to Indonesia's priorities in the economic landscape. Most significantly, the Prime Minister affirmed Australia's commitment to the $200 million Climate Resilience and Infrastructure Partnership, which will help support Indonesia's energy transition. We would also like to take this opportunity to commend the Indonesian government on its handling of the G20 conference, which was a great success on the world stage. Indonesia used its G20 presidency last year to show global leadership in supporting global health architecture, digital-based economic transformation, and energy transition. These are important priorities that don't just safeguard sustainable economic growth globally, but also facilitate investment and trade. On investment, we are seeing some Australian businesses make some bold steps to invest and expand in Indonesia, and I'm going to list a number of them. Some of them may be familiar to you, some perhaps not. So Monash University opened a campus in Jakarta in April 2020, utilising provisions in the ISEPA agreement that allow an Australian university to establish a physical presence in Indonesia. In May 2022, Macquarie Asset Management acquired a minority stake in Bersama Digital Infrastructure, original infrastructure digital platform. Blackmores continues its successful partnership with Kalbe Pharma to supply health supplements to the Indonesian market. Arcadia Energy Australia is close to completing a hydropower project in North Sumatra. Orica is investing up to $550 million in ammonium nitrate plant in Kalimantan with local partner PT Kaltim Nitrate Indonesia. GroundProbe has expanded its high-tech mining technology in Balikpapan, and Linfox Indonesia has completed a logistics hub outside of Jakarta capable of processing 34,000 pallets per month. This is just a small roll call of the ones that we thought you would be interested in, but these investments demonstrate that not only is increased cooperation between Australia and Indonesia in this space good for shareholders, it's also good for Indonesian partners and consumers and the country as a whole. But we want to do more to deepen economic engagement in the region. In November, the government appointed former Macquarie CEO, Mr. Nicholas Moore, as the Special Envoy for Southeast Asia. Mr. Moore will lead the development of the government's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040. And this strategy will set out a pathway to strengthen the Australian economic engagement with Southeast Asia. It will also map current trade and investment opportunities, as well as provide a practical roadmap to bolster two-way trade and grow Australian investment. On trade, it is pleasing that Australian merchandise exports to Indonesia exceeded 10 billion Australian dollars for the first time in 2021-2022. And this shows that our industries are taking raw materials and turning them into products for export to the rest of the world. For example, Indonesia's steel sector utilises our iron ore and metallurgical coal. Our service providers are also continuing to develop strong two-way links, helping to serve domestic, regional and global needs. We're seeing the return of Australian tourists to Bali and Indonesian students to Australian universities and other schools following the reopening of borders, which is great to see. We know that Indonesia is keen to utilise more renewable energy in its energy mix to safeguard its energy security and help move the world towards net zero emissions. Indonesia also wants to make a difference to addressing change, and it recently elevated its 2030 emissions reductions targets. We are sharing insights and exploring avenues for cooperation to meet this challenge. Australian Minister Chris Bowen and his counterpart, Minister Arifin Tasrif, held the first Indonesia-Australia Ministerial Energy Dialogue last year. And Australian clean energy providers should find strong demand in Indonesia for technology and know-how that can support their energy transition challenges. To further these objectives, we just hosted a visit not 2 weeks ago by Coordinating Minister for Maritime Affairs and Investment, Luhut Panjaitan. He came to Perth and Canberra to investigate opportunities for collaboration in electric vehicle manufacturing and battery minerals cooperation on the back of both our respective minerals endowments. As a former car manufacturing city, which still has ancillary automotive manufacturing capacities, there could be room for niche expertise in Melbourne in this exciting area. This is an exciting and ambitious endeavour. Indonesia's plans to create an electric vehicle ecosystem, as Pak Luhut called it, and who better to partner with for long-term objectives than your neighbour? In conclusion, the Australian government appreciates the work of the BDO and the IABC and other business associations in promoting the business ties between our two countries. It's through genuine partnerships, like those encouraged by both business groups, that Australia and Indonesia can grow strong together. So thank you very much from me and from the Indonesia Economic and Trade team here at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renee Bryant. In only 10 minutes, I think you talked about 3,000 things and I could have kept going, so a little bit unfair, but I can get in contact afterwards. It gives me great pleasure to go switch back to the Indonesian side and welcome to the stage His Excellency the Consul General of Indonesia in Melbourne. Thank you very much. Sorry.
So that's really good actually. I just talked to Bill. How many in the audience in Jakarta? Bill, around 75 to 100. And it's not including one in Sydney, here also in Melbourne. First of all, good afternoon to Melbourne and Sydney. And then of course, selamat pagi untuk Indonesia. Yang kami hormati Bapak Erlangga Hartarto, Menteri Koordinator Bidang Perekonomian Indonesia, Bapak Agus Gumiwang Kartasasmita, Menteri Perindustrian Republik Indonesia, Bapak Tanu Brata, CEO BDO in Indonesia, and my new friend Bill, and just met a really good one, the Australia partner, BDO Australia partner, and then my colleague from the Tibet, Renee Bryant, of course, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like also to join when we went to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting today. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm very honored with this opportunity to attend this very important business forum. For this, please allow me to express my appreciation to BDO, Indonesia and Australia, of course, for arranging this event and having me in this very important gathering. We all have heard the keynote speeches from the Indonesian Coordinator Minister for Economic Affairs and the Indonesian Minister of Industry. So please allow me again to echo what they have said. The bilateral relations between Indonesia and Australia have been, in fact, long-standing and robust, characterized by mutual respect, friendship, and collaborations. Indonesia is the fourth most populous country in the world and boasts a rapidly growing middle class and ample opportunities to advance even further. While Australia has advanced technological capabilities and strong capital. Through collaborations, our two countries have tried to unlock the full potential of our respective economies and create a brighter future for our two peoples. Now, in recent years, we have witnessed the development of business cooperation, trade, investment, and tourism. Despite the positive development and our geographical proximity, I believe we have not realized our full potential. Not yet. Ibu Bapak yang saya hormati, ladies and gentlemen, the timing of this business forum could not be more relevant. To begin with, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement between Indonesia and Australia, or we all know as the IACPA, has been officially entered into force for more than 2 years ago. This provides avenues of economic cooperation, including technical assistance and capacity building. This agreement also provides enhanced market access and lower barriers to trade and investment in goods, services, and investment. It also creates a more conducive business environment for Australian companies, Indonesia, and of course, vice versa. It should bind us as an economic powerhouse, if I mentioned, leveraging our geographical proximity and economic complementarity, competitiveness, and productivity. Furthermore, we are navigating a post-pandemic era, and that's why we have witnessed a glimpse of hope, such as revival of trade and investment relations, and then resume of direct people-to-people contact. There is also reopening a direct flight between Australia and Indonesia. Remember that on 24th of November, 2022, last year, I attended with, of course, the President Director of Garuda, the reopening of Garuda Indonesia as a non-stop flight, Jakarta to Melbourne. We have already 2 flights in a week, and then 1 flight to Bali. It's a good opportunity for us. Now, we should maintain this positive momentum and even push it further. The government of Indonesia remains committed to building strong and mutually beneficial business ties with Australia, using the existing momentum to recover from the pandemic. And of course, this commitment is carried out wholeheartedly by the Indonesian representative in Australia. As we have all mentioned before with the previous speaker, I also recognize that there are still plenty of room to expand to encourage stronger business cooperation. And if I said from myself, in our Consulate General, we are continuously striving to encourage cooperation in digital technology, for instance, health, renewable energy, and infrastructure. We also would like to promote more the export of Indonesian high-value added manufactured products, digital commerce, trade in services, and long-term budgets. Of course, we'd like also to expand markets for manufactured products. Now, Indonesia and Australia share common interests in various fora, including at regional and global levels. Thus, we also have tried to incorporate our regional and global engagement into our bilateral relation with Australia. Remember, last year we have our roadshow of a business forum during our presidency in G20. This year, with our presidency of our chair in ASEAN, we are going to repeat again the same thing. We are also going to have the roadshow of business forum from Indonesia to many cities in Australia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by reiterating our institutional commitment to strengthening Indonesia and Australia for business cooperations and for other engagements. I have no doubt that with our collaborations, the mutual beneficial cooperation between Indonesia and Australia will become even more fruitful in the future. I look forward to our future collaborations. Thank you, and terima kasih banyak.
Thank you very much, Consul General. Our next speaker is Helen Brown. Helen has more than 20 years' experience in writing, speaking, and analysing complex subjects and issues through several roles as multimedia journalist, producer, and communications specialist. She is passionate about Australia's role in positive collaborating with Asia. Helen lived and worked in Indonesia for 4 years as a correspondent for the national broadcaster ABC News, covering social, economic, political, and strategic events. This included coverage of the 2014 presidential election. She currently leads the communications and outreach team at the Australian Indonesian Centre, supporting its work in managing multidisciplinary and bilateral research projects across 11 universities. The time in Asia prompted her to found Business Asia, a company which provides cultural guidance for businesses going into the unknown. Welcome to the stage, Helen.
I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which I stand, to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to say good afternoon to everyone in the room and selamat pagi to my friends in Indonesia. I see some familiar faces in the room and that's wonderful. Thank you for joining us. I would like to acknowledge the Coordinating Minister for Economic Affairs, Pak Erlangga. I'd like to acknowledge the Minister for Industry, Pak Agus, and I would like to thank you, your Consul General, for joining us today. It's lovely to see you again. This really is a passion of mine. When I was living in Indonesia, I was struck by how little business Australia was actually doing with this country that was so close to us and where there was so much change going on. It was part of my mission, I think, as a journalist, to try and explain the change, because to me it was astounding. And I just thought that we didn't really understand it enough. There are a lot of perceptions about Indonesia which needed to change. And that's partly what I tried to do with the stories, the good and the bad. I think one of the most obvious things that we have to think about when it comes to trade between the two countries is the mindset around it. And I think when we talk about I received the material. It was about an FTA, a free trade agreement. But in fact, it's not that. It's an economic agreement, and that means so much more. IA-CEPA means so much more. It means an agreement around trade, but also investment, and particularly around collaboration. It means thinking about what is Indonesia's direction? What does the country aspire to be? And where does Australia fit in with that? Trade is important. We've seen how I think meat products have grown substantially over the last couple of years. Grains have grown substantially. Those things are important. But what really makes the difference in the relationship is where we work out how we complement each other and we find a way to work together. And it's not easy. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's easy. It's not. It requires a different approach. And I'm not pretending to be an expert in trade mechanisms or how the agreement is implemented. I know that there's lots of moving parts around that. But I just wanted to touch on a few sectors and some of the things that are happening in them that may provide us a bit of a glimpse and a way forward. Now, I'm told if I click. Is that correct? Yes, thank you. All right, I have to declare my bias. Jakarta is my second home. But, once it's in your heart, it's in your heart. So that's why I say special hello to my friends in Indonesia. And also thank you to Pak Bill Cole and Pak Tano from BDO for this opportunity. So when you look at a city like that, and that was taken by a friend of mine, it's hard to grasp the size of the change taking place. And of course, Jakarta is different to what's happening in the outlying areas, but there are lots of other second tier, very large cities in Indonesia that are following a lot of what Jakarta is doing in terms of uptake and the direction that they want to go in. Is that working? Could you go to the next slide? Yes. Thank you. So one of the things that often comes up in conversations with business, and no surprise, this interests Australian business because we have such a strong presence around agriculture and food. We've developed very good production systems for commodities. We have innovation, we have technology that ensures we can create food that is of a world standard. We go into many markets. And we like to think that perhaps we can just sell a lot of that food to Indonesia. And possibly we can. But also, is that what Indonesia really wants? Now, food is a sensitive subject in Indonesia. It is a country that wants to be able to look after itself as much as it can when it comes to food. But it also has a population that is earning more income, expects different foods and wants a greater diversity. So how do we work within those? I'm going to give two quick examples about the sort of, it's not a disconnect, but you can see where some of the complexities lie. And, I have to say, one of the stories I did, I went out to visit Indonesian farmers. It's based on a WTO dispute that the United States had brought against Indonesia around oranges. And, it just raised the whole question, well, what can Indonesia's farmers do? Are they capable? So we went out and had a look. And they are capable and they love what they do. They just didn't have the innovation or support at that time. So one of the great achievements of the IA-CEPA or CEPA was that Australia could export carrots. Now, Indonesia doesn't take many exports of carrots. It had for a while, but it was a significant accomplishment of the negotiating team, and they allowed 5,000 tonnes to go in. That goal of about 5,000 tonnes isn't being reached. I look back on the figures and I think it was only 200 and something tonnes in the last few years per year. And there are some regulatory issues around that. There are some differences of systems. There's a lot of other things going on, which I won't go into. But, it exists and it's there and it's trying to set a path for that kind of trade. Another thing that's happening, and this is through Catalyst, which was the body set up by the Indonesian and Australian governments to explore ways to encourage trade between the two countries. Catalyst is looking at a program of how to improve mangosteen exports from Indonesia. Now, in 2012, I remember doing a story on the first mangosteen exports from Indonesia, and it was a very cool story, basically. And what the growers had to go through to be allowed to export the fruit to Australia was mind-boggling. But they ticked all the boxes, jumped through the hoops, and got it into the country. My understanding is that the biosecurity measures changed in that time, so it became a problematic trade. But what they're doing now is looking at, well, how can we create that trade again? Because Indonesia grows very good mangosteens. And perhaps if it can create a mangosteen industry that reaches a high standard, it couldn't just export to Australia, it could export to other countries. So what's Australia's role in this? Well, the Australian side, and I'm talking to some people involved in it, they're looking at the processes, the systems, the kind of innovation that is needed to help Indonesia have the processing infrastructure that means it can reach that goal. And that's the kind of thing that is exciting, because that means true collaboration in the food industry. And it's not just about selling a product, it's about how do we work together to create an industry and make it more than what it is. So this is where the Australian possibility comes in, because it's our know-how, it's our innovation, and it's a desire, to try and find ways to work together. So they're just two examples from food and agribusiness, and you would have heard the Minister mention agribusiness and how closely they're looking at that. The next subject is one that's quite close to the Australia-Indonesia Centre's heart, because we've done some work on it, the electric vehicle industry. Again, you would have heard the Minister talk about the development of a battery industry. And Australia's role in that is around having lithium that needs to go into the batteries. Indonesia has the nickel. The question now is, how do the two countries work together to create an industry that sells not just batteries, between each other, but to other parts of the region? So you remember you're talking about ASEAN here. So it's that, how do we combine our strengths and use that to create another industry? So that's the discussion that's going on at the moment. I recall in 2018, I had a meeting and this idea was raised in Indonesia, and they talked about the tax benefits that would be applied to ensure the industry had some support. And I came back to Australia and I talked to some people in Australia, and there was just this lack of understanding about the potential here, to be quite frank. And probably because I'd lived in Indonesia, I understood that I was starting to get a snippet of what the vision was for the next 10 years. But if you haven't lived in the country, if you don't understand it, you're probably thinking, well, where's this going to go? How does it actually fit in? So, that's when I say there needs to be a bit of a change in the mindset around what's possible and what we should pay attention to. Now I realise I'm sounding like I'm Australian business bashing. Some Australian businesses have done very well, but they've done well. We heard a list because they've gone in, they've listened, they've taken the time to develop a relationship. They've worked out where is a synergy that creates a partnership that can lead to something else. It may not be just what I think it is. Maybe there's something else going on that I can work with. Not always, but sometimes. I haven't even referred to my notes, so I'm going off the top of my head, and I hope I remember it all. So the electric vehicle industry, I'm really interested to see what comes up through this. You can see, Indonesia has such a desire to move into this area, to also, as part of its plan to move away from traditional energy sources to new energy sources, it sees electric vehicles and motorbikes as a way to do this. So, how cool is that? It's gone, how do I change the energy mix? Oh, okay, we'll support an electric vehicle industry. And off they go. And they've got a 10-year plan for the battery industry to do it. So it's big thinking. And it's how do we fit in with that? That's where the opportunities lie. Coming up. Oh. So this leads me to talking about digital skills, because digital skills are very much part of Indonesia's aspiration around what wants to be its aspiration. Double talking now. There are areas that Indonesia is very keen to improve people's skills on. Now, the electric vehicle industry is one way for them to also upskill a young demographic. Imagine the skills you're going to need to have an engineering industry around electric batteries, for instance. But Indonesia has a plan called Making Indonesia 4.0, which is about the industrial manufacturing revolution, which is also mentioned by one of the ministers. And the Australia-Indonesia Centre did a report on this, and it looked at some of the areas where there was possible collaboration. So I won't read out that list, but as you can see, there is a lot there around digital skills. So that is something to consider. It's not just about exporting a product, it's about collaborating on something bigger, on how do we work with Indonesia on helping them develop a young workforce, which really desperately wants to learn new skills so that we can go into these industries. And we have that experience in Australia. I put that up just to give you a little bit of an idea of what's being talked about or discussed. I might have to get you to do that, Shannon. It's not liking me. Thank you. So one of the ideas or potentials in that list was around health, e-health, digital health. How do we make our health systems better, particularly in using digital applications? And there has been quite a bit of work going on in this area, particularly with the Australia-Indonesia Business Council. They have a healthcare group led by Jeff Parker, who's based in Brisbane, and I have to credit him. He's up the back on the left of that group photo. Now, he was telling me that recently the head of Indonesia's Digital Transformation Office, Pak Setiaji, I hope that's correct, was in the country and spent 5 days looking at a program called eHealth, which CSIRO does, which is around standardizing information into a digital form so that it can be used across health platforms. It's like, there's a code red, but everyone has the same code, so they know what the code red is. There's a code for this kind of symptom. There's a code for this kind of drug. So it's about standardizing those codes. So, Indonesia does want to learn. It's looking for who can help them provide the tools, but then also help them incorporate those tools so that they can achieve what they want to achieve. So he was telling me about this visit, which went for 5 days, and literally there was just somebody there the whole time watching and learning. And Jeff said I can share that with you because I just have that on record. So they had a lot of fun, as you can imagine, as you can see. The other another interesting development is in healthcare, but also in skills and training, where La Trobe University here in Victoria has signed an agreement to assist with nursing training. And it's about finding alignment between standards and also what is taught, how to be a good nurse. It's working with Indonesia on a program, again, through Catalyst to do that. And that's this has been talked about for a while. Indonesia has had a desire to improve its nursing workforce for quite some time. We often hear about doctors, but we know that nurses are on the front line. And so now this pilot project is underway to help with that training at La Trobe. So these are, I've picked these out as examples of where you can find a place for the two countries to work together. And when I really honestly didn't know what I was going to talk about initially, and I just started looking at what was happening, and I thought there is a common theme here. And it's not simple trade. It's not, I'll sell you this and you do that, or X, Y, and Z. It's let's sit down and have a chat about where the opportunities are, where we are both looking to use our skills or knowledge, or what we would like to achieve, and find a way to do it. So it does take more time, it's more complex, but ultimately there's a bigger impact. And within that sharing of a business goal, we're also understanding each other better. We're getting to understand, how the business cultures of the countries work, how the systems work, what's actually possible. It's all a bit of a testing ground, but that's why I thought those examples were interesting. And thank you. I think that's it. I've probably taken up enough time. I hope that provided some insights, and I'm
So that's the challenge. Sih. Tadi kan juga dibilangin kan Indonesia lack of innovation in terms of
is the national president of the Indonesian and Australian Business Council, who's based in Jakarta. George is also the vice chairman for global engagement of the Association of Private Universities and Higher Education Institutions, and the chairman of the Australia and New Zealand Bilateral Committee in the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We have Shinti Melody. She's the head of Division of Investment, International Relations, Information and Communication of Indonesian Young Entrepreneur Association, Jakarta chapter, the local president of the Junior International Chamber for Jakarta, and on the board of the directors of the ASEAN Young Women's Entrepreneurs Club. On the other side, we have our moderator is Professor Susan Freeman, PhD, who was appointed Professor of International Business in 2015 and the former Dean of Postgraduate and Professional Programs in the University of South Australia Business School. She provides leadership in the area of international business, research and postgraduate teaching, and learning to ensure a culture that embraces both scholarship and excellence. Susan was appointed in 2019 as an honorary professor at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, in the Macquarie Business School in International Business, where she works with colleagues and PhD students in the School of Management. We have Lane Cook. She's the Finance Director and part owner of Ronstam International, Pty Ltd, a privately owned manufacturing company based in Braeside, Melbourne, specialising in sailboat and related industrial architectural hardware. Ronstam has 150 employees worldwide and manufactures in Melbourne, Indonesia and Denmark. We have Barry Rajaja, is the director of Gaura Chocolate Australia, a company that markets and distributes single origin chocolates from Sumba Island in Indonesia, where he's also a full-time executive manager renewable energy for Westpac and plays a key role in delivering Westpac Group's 100% renewable energy transition by 2025. We have Dr. Regina Kareem, who is the Senior Global Science Communication and Claims Manager of the H&H Group, parent company of Swiss and Biostime. She is a medical doctor with vast industry experience in science and regulation of infant formula, supplement, functional food and pharmaceuticals. We please welcome all of our panelists to their stage and their virtual stages.
Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, Pak George, Pak Yui, Ibu Sinta. I think it was great that we've heard from government representatives from both from the Indonesian side and our Australian counterparts about the importance of building both trade, investments in various sectors of the economy, especially post-pandemic, and having a tool, the IA-CEPA, which until today, I think not many people have know what's it all about, but there is that tool to increase and boost economic and trade relationships between both countries. Now, we have here today people representing businesses, and we would like to hear from them their experiences about doing trade, on how the challenges and opportunities. And later on, if any of you have any questions, perhaps they could later give their views and answers regarding the topics you're interested in. I'd like to start out by saying that from an Indonesian perspective, as both ministers, Minister Hartarto and Minister Kartasasmita had said, that Indonesia and Australia are both counterparts in both bilateral diplomatic stances and both economic and trade. But the relationship in the past few years it's there, it's good, but we would like to see it move to a next level. Now, there are challenges and there are opportunities, but again, let's start now hearing from Pak George from IABC on what he thinks about the key challenges are on doing businesses, Indonesian companies doing business in Australia, how they should approach their counterparts in Australia, what the challenges are, and what role IABC can do to facilitate Indonesian businesses and entrepreneurs in actually venturing out into Australia.
Thank you, Afan, and thank you to BDO, Tano, for the opportunity to be here with all of you. My name is George Yuan Manandika, and I'm the president of the Indonesian and Australian Business Council. And I'm really honored to be here with all of you. I also want to recognize my colleagues, actually, that are here with me. Mr. Peter Fanning, who's also the president of the Australia ASEAN Chambers in ASEAN. So obviously Indonesia is chairing ASEAN this year, so there are about 9 or 10 chambers in ASEAN, including IABC is a member of that. And also my good friend here, the treasurer of IABC, Ben Giles, the senior commissioner of Queensland here in Indonesia. And I see colleagues also from IABC here. I see the WA government, which is our member, Diaz, who represented here, thank you. And also Tim from PT Sun Cable Indonesia, that also obviously is involved in a lot of these areas that we're just talking about. But if we talk about the challenges, I want to talk about the opportunities first. Because as an entrepreneur, we talk opportunities first, challenges will work it out, right? So that is the structure of how entrepreneurship, the mindset of entrepreneurship itself. So I think from the perspective of IABC, which has been one of the one of 6 members of the Business Partnership Group, that was the key reference to the IACPA itself. So that was IABC, Indonesia Australia Business Council, the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce Industry, or KADI in Indonesia, and the APINDO on the Indonesian side, and on the Australian side was ACCI, AIBC, and also AIG. We saw the opportunity of the IACPA as beyond just trade and investment, what Helen Brown just shared. It's the spirit, it's the mindset. And the governments create a framework, but in terms of action, it's mindset and spirit. And the way we see it, because it's convergence really of economies. And the convergence of these economies relate to the fact that Indonesia and Australia are the 2 largest economies in the region. If you look at the southeastern hemisphere of the globe. And also the fact that Indonesia and Australia are G20 economies and open democracies, open societies, freedom of speech. Academics can speak, their minds, and that openness allows these 2 economies to converge. That is the opportunity in an overarching standpoint. Now, IACPA itself obviously focuses on sectors, right? We're looking at agriculture as the priority, health, and I want to touch on education and energy, because those are 2 spots that we see business now taking, or the private sector now taking action to make it happen. Obviously in education, I think there are pipelines of Indonesia's internationalization of our education sector. You see the pipelines, Monash, here in Indonesia, Pak Tano is an alumni, I believe. The CEO of BDO here is an alumni. And you also see the other pipelines coming in. And so those are the opportunities that exist. But you see a lot of movement now in energy, especially in the space that have been mentioned, and that is in the area of the green economy. I was just in Perth last week, representing with our chairman of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, signing a memorandum of understanding with the Western Australian government on concerning critical minerals. So therefore, we are creating an alliance in order to be able to work together and collaborate together to access into building the EV ecosystem of the globe. I mean, we're talking about a powerhouse, an economic powerhouse in EV ecosystem. And action has been taken. Pak Luhut was there 2 weeks ago, the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry 1 week after, and signing the Memorandum of Understanding in Parliament House of the Western Australian Government Parliament House. So providing significance of the seriousness that are the intentions that we want to move forward. Now, however, from a more practical sense, from a business sense, there are opportunities. I mean, the numbers that were just shared by Erlangga, you have an increase of 300% in investments inward to Indonesia. Now, obviously, those who have been in the space of business engagement between Indonesia and Australia understand that probably it's not all direct investment. You're going to see investment coming from Singapore, Indonesia, and vice versa. And you also see a lot of investments coming into Australia. I mean, if you look at even at the energy space, it appears to be more Indonesian companies looking at Australia as an opportunity. Yeah, and to create that whole economic powerhouse ecosystem. So obviously there are opportunities, but there are challenges. Now, what are the challenges? The challenges, I think, the mindset is there, the spirit is there, but still, companies still manage risk here. You have to manage risk, and that factor is obviously a factor that we have to understand each other better. But it takes guts, I have to say. It takes in entrepreneurism. If you have the guts, you might have the glory. You might not get the glory. You might get the fame, but not the fortune. But that is entrepreneurism, and so but I come from the private sector, and we are in principle optimistic. The numbers show, increase in trade. You saw a 300% increase in trade in the last year to year. 300% increase in investment inward to Indonesia in the last year to year. And so the numbers show that there is strong opportunity, but I think the challenges, it gets, especially I think my colleague here, Shinta, can share. If you're talking, say, for example, export from Indonesia to Australia, the gap is there, right? The gap is there. And so those are things that entrepreneurs try to work at. Obviously, Pak Imi, with his experience in FINA, we work at it. We try to find our niche, and we'll get there somehow, some way. But the spirit and the mindset has to be there. And I think the beauty of the Indonesian-Australian relationship is the spirit and the mindset is there. And so now it's up to, I think, the private sector to make it happen, and that's what we do, right? We make things happen. So thank you very much, Pak, and I give the floor back to you.
Thank you, Pak George. Now, going back to what you said on SIPA and how everything is growing, especially for Indonesian companies. I'm going to Pak Iwi now. How do you see SIPA working? It's been there for the past 2 years now, almost 3 years. How does it actually fit into your business? I know you're into krupuk and frozen shrimps, but how does it actually work for you? Does it really help businesses, or what would you like to see moving forward, as Pak George said, in a practical sense?
So, of course, the free trade agreement really helps, because when you export something, then you got zero tariff basically, So that way, the product can become more competitive, right? So, but the product that we are exporting to Australia, there are two types, which is one is the frozen shrimp, which is quite a plain vanilla. Why? Because it is accepted in all over the world, basically. It's a global product. Yeah. So that is quite a plain vanilla to just export to Australia. On the other hand, we also exporting kerupuk. Yeah. Kerupuk is a very Indonesian niche market. Yeah. So we started off by targeting the diaspora in Australia, basically. Those Indonesian students, Indonesian people who actually lives in Australia. But along the way, we work together closely with the retailer, and we actually develop a product that is that we want to become like a mass market in Australia. So in a way, we want to build a FMCG business in Australia.
So for that, when you do exports like your cookbooks, are there any standards you need to fill? Is it difficult moving from an Indonesian market, or how does Australian market compare to other markets in the sense of your product, let's say quality, health, because it's food, right?
Yes.
So is it more difficult to access those regulations there compared to other countries? I'll give you an example. Like in the past few years, the Indonesian automotive sector could not enter into the Australian market because of safety standards. We didn't have a testing ground here and all that stuff. But since last year, we're now exclusively producing certain Toyota's actually exporting an exclusive producer of a certain type of their vehicles to Australia. Now, do you face those challenges also from a regulation perspective from the Australian, and how do you meet those standards, or how do you seek to meet those standards?
So we have been exporting to around 32 countries, basically. Yeah. So we have international standards like the best aquaculture practices, ISO, HACCP, EU number, as well as the BRC. Yeah. Which is BRC is a British retailer consortium, in which is a international standard, mainly for the Commonwealth country, which is includes Australia, basically. So by learning all these standards, it actually helps us to play in the global market, basically. Yeah, and in a way, regulation is there for one thing, but the most important thing is the demand and the requirement from the consumer. Like I'd say, sustainability nowadays becomes a demand from the consumer itself, which is we have to identify that one, and we have to abide by it, basically. Yeah, that way our product is creating more
acceptability.
Acceptability.
So I mean, learning your company is huge, but let's say you have these smaller Indonesian companies that want to venture out, but they have to adhere to these standards. How do they do that? You said you were doing this learning progress. For you, it's, well, I could say, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a little bit easier for you because you have access to that. But how would you say, how should the Indonesian small, medium industries, small, medium enterprises get that knowledge and moving forward? And what do you expect? What concessions do you expect, both from the Indonesian governments, advisors, or your Australian counterparts in fulfilling those consumer needs?
So I think since we are a food company, I think all those regulation is there so that there's a safety in the food, because food is something that we put into our body, basically, right? So regardless on the scale of the business itself, when you are a food manufacturer, there are certain standards that you have to fulfill, which is a safety standard, right? In which I think more and more people are concerned about health, basically, and then when people grow better into some economically, they need better products, right? And safe product, healthy products. So in a way, all the food manufacturer has to adhere to that standard, because your ethically has to be right, has to be correct, because you are a food company.
Is it difficult?
it's not easy. Yeah, it's not easy, especially when you talk about competition, everything, and then cost management. But it's something that we all have to be responsible for it, and it has to be reflected in the quality of the product.
Great. Let me turn now to Ibu Sinta, hearing from both Pak George and Pak Iwi. You're in the furniture industry. Does what Pak Iwi says make sense to you? Because again, one is talking about safety because it's something you eat. How do you see your business? And I heard that you're going to venture out also to Australia. How would you see, what are your challenges you're facing, or people from your industry venturing out into Australia? What are the challenges that you see specifically for your industry? And what do you expect, again, from both sides of the government to make your lives easier in doing business?
Okay. From our industry, actually, in the furniture business, as we know, first of course, the market is there for Australia. The market is there. But the funny thing is, like, Australia is very close by with Indonesia. But the funny thing is, most of Indonesian companies, we export more to Europe and America. So I mean, so there's a question definitely. So when as for my company itself, the regulation sometimes there. I mean, it's good that the regulation is sometimes it's more strict than if you talk about Europeans for some countries. And also for the furniture industries, I also do a lot with the designers in Australia. One of the challenges is that in Indonesia, we're lacking of the innovation, the technology based. That's what we need. So when they give us some designs for the Australian companies, sometimes we cannot produce that in terms of the lack of technology that we have in Indonesian market. That's one thing. And another thing, the challenges that we face is, of course, the cost of logistics. Australia is quite close by with Indonesia, as I say, but the cost of logistics is still quite high sometimes for Indonesian market. But the market is there, and then, of course, the continuity of the market. But then definitely it's doable. And of course, we do hope also for the SMEs, because you also talk about the SMEs. We also want to actually do some business matching for the SMEs to have a partner in Australia more and more for the retail. And of course, also, we would like to also have the helping hands of the diaspora that Mr. Iwi has talked about for the people, the people in Indonesian people who live there, to actually help us also to expand the market, so the market access. But up until now, I still do export to Australia. I export to Perth, I export to Sydney. We also continue, but then my I export actually more also to European and America. So actually there is a quiet pity, we could say, that also, of course, Australia is close by. So we would love also to actually engage more with Australian companies. Yeah, but the market is there for furniture industries. Yeah.
Great. Moving back to Pak George, you've heard that both Pak Iwi and Bu Sinta faces these consumer requirements, challenges, industry standards, logistical costs. Sorry. How does IABC play into helping companies? Well, let's say Pak Iwi is up there, but other companies are still trying to reach where Pak Iwi is. How does IABC play a role in helping the SMEs or any other companies trying to venture out to Australia mitigate these challenges? Or how should they do, let's say, find information, or do you give help them? What support does IABC, and how can they reach out to you there and there?
Yes, thank you. Well, to answer your question, how you would like to reach out to us to be able to support you in engaging in business with Australian businesses. Our executive director is here, Mr. Arfat, and you can connect with him later today. Our office is at the World Trade Center 1, and so we're more than happy to support. But in terms of building the networks, that's what we do and we've been around for 34, 35 years. We have a sister organization in Australia, the AIBC. So for 30 to 35 years, IABC has been, you might say, advocating the people-to-people relations, especially business-to-business relations between Indonesia and Australia. And it's building networks. We were instrumental in the whole framework of the IECPA and the thinking behind it. And you know, in many ways, we understand how to channel into action. But there are matters that we have to work on. But again, I see the movement on the ground moving very fast. If you see the numbers that the ministers just mentioned, those are increasing the numbers in 300% per annum.
That's huge, yeah.
That's huge, in trade and investment. And I would have to qualify investment. That's the direct investment. There's a lot of indirect, you know, how the world of finance works. It sometimes works in many ways. Amy's laughing right now. You know? And our colleagues in BDO would know, I believe, how you structure deals, right? And so, but I see that also as another opportunity. If we want to support the trade and investment, we do have to work on the engagement and alliance of the financial institutions. That's going to be the next step. And that's why we had a significant delegation of the sovereign funds of Australia that came into Indonesia a few months ago. The special envoy for Australia, ex-CEO Macquarie, I think was just mentioned. And there's an alliance there that could really help the trade and investment. But sometimes, you know, as they say, the devil is in the details, right? And so when you get to trade, there's a lot of details there. And Imi, I think, and Ibu Shinta can share with you the challenges. But I see that as an opportunity because it does pick, from our end, Indonesia, it does pick our game up, right? Yep. And we see the economic relationship with Australia as actually building up our services sector, because that's where human capital development comes in. And if you see in Indonesia's GDP, services is probably 30–40% of our contribution of our GDP, right? But if you're moving into a developed country, you want it to be at 70%. I mean, that's the average. Although sometimes it's always good to maintain your production base and manufacturing base, and a lot of countries are learning that nowadays. But again, you know, so I think that's a plus factor. But coming back into what IBC can do, we are very, you might say, strong in building the engagement between Indonesian and Australian businesses and channeling in that engagement. And happy to support anybody who would like to connect with IBC. And again, we have offices here and our contact. Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, Pak George. I think now, before we take Q&As from the floor, we'll hand over the session now to our Australian counterparts, and let's hear what they've got to say on the various issues on our trade and economic bilateral sessions.
And it's going to take time because we need to understand that the requirements around relationships ebb and flow. It needs physical visiting. That's why the importance of flights over the last year or two have become so important. It's very difficult to make new relationships without flights. We also need to understand some of the fundamentals, including visas. If you want to come and have a look at what's happening in Australia, and our Australian business people want to have a look at what's happening in Indonesia, there are some fundamentals. You want to take some of your business people with you. You want to build those relationships. Visas need to be easy on both sides. But what is also important is to actually listen to people that are actually involved on the ground, so to speak, though a lot of that is digital now. This gives me great opportunity to ask Regina to come and join me, and in particular to ask her a little about the IP and patent issues. We know they're important. We know they're complicated. And there are things that I'm sure she knows now that she might share with us, that if she'd known when she first started, it would have made things a lot easier. Risk can be calculated. Uncertainty is something that we fear because it's not familiar, but risk is something that we can calculate by having the knowledge of those on the ground. Regina.
Thank you very much, Susan. My name is Regina. I'm representing H&H Group. We have office in Australia here in Melbourne, based in Melbourne, and we have the brands Swiss as nutraceuticals, which is vitamin mineral supplement. We also have Biostime, which is the infant formula and children's supplement. So Susan mentioned about the IP things, which is really something that we haven't really seen as a risk when we would like to enter Indonesia. And we got this should be our homework before. And we just found out that when we are going to enter Indonesia with the Biostime brand, it's already a local player, a big local player has that IP as a local IP. So that's why we cannot enter the market with this brand. And recently they already launched this product with that brand, which we cannot do anything because they have the IP in Indonesia. So I think to understand about the market is very important. To understand about how not only from the regulatory point on the trade marketing, but also from the legal point of view is very, very important. We also nowadays we try to get more and more understanding in terms of the regulation and the trade, but this is a big things that we face when we enter Indonesia.
Thank you very much. And that's what we call wisdom, isn't it? And experience. And we can reduce some of those uncertainties by having that shared knowledge. Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask, is it Ferry in our Sydney office to talk to us a little bit as well. And what I wanted to ask is, particularly in terms of Australian consumers' current perspective on Indonesian products, this is something that he's able to talk to us about. What are the attitudes? Are they changing? And particularly with the IA, SEPA, has it become easier? Is that familiarity happening? And so I'm Ferry to talk about that. And what are some of the opportunities and possibly the strengths and some of the key selling points of Indonesian products here in Australia? Over to you, Ferry.
Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished guests and friends and colleagues. So, my name is Ferry Wijaya. If I'm in Indonesia, in Australia, people call me Ferry Wijaya. So, I am here representing the farmers and the people in East Nusa Tenggara because I'm distributing and importing Gaura chocolate. So this is this Gaura chocolate is 100% actually sourced from Sumba Island and made in Indonesia, and which is amazing. And I think one of the questions that Suzanne sort of alluded in terms of the perspective of Indonesian product. I think Australians love Indonesian products, particularly largely because of the craftsmanship and the cultural perspective. But I think there are opportunities, which is something that we actually exploring for this Gaura chocolate, is for Indonesian companies to look at commodities and natural resources and build the product end to end, rather than just focus on the community and then exporting somewhere else. So, which is what we've actually been doing for the Gaura chocolate. So, the family that owns the plantation in Sumba Island since 1990s have been selling the cocoa beans, and funnily enough, the buyer is actually based in Indonesia. The buyers bought the commodities in a very cheap price during a harvest, and then keep it there in Indonesia and then import it into around the world at a very high price. So what we've been trying to do in the last couple of years is to actually change that mindset to look at added value end to end and develop this product and then sell it to consumers into in Indonesia and in Australia. So yes,
It's an exciting time, isn't it? Getting the idea across that the high quality, which of course is going to be important in Europe as well as here. Thank you very, very much for those comments. I'd now like to turn to our panel who are going to provide us with a comment from Lynn from Sydney. This is taped, so just bear with us for a few moments while we get that to operate. And if there are any questions from the floor, please let us know in a moment. We're just about to get this to take. Thank you to our communicators.
The benefit of Mr. Lane McCook to speak with us concerning his experiences in trading between Australia and Indonesia. Mr. McCook is the Group Tax Manager for Ronston International Proprietary Limited. It's a privately owned manufacturing business that's based in Melbourne, but is a global business spanning the Asia Pacific and European markets. It is domiciled, headquartered in the US. Mr. McCook has had 9 years, as I understand it, experience in administering trade between the Australian entity, Indonesia and other Asia Pacific nations. Welcome, Mr. McCook.
Thank you, Bill.
If I may ask, as a general notion in the Asia Pacific region, what is your opinion about the free trade agreements that exist there, and are they helpful generally to your business?
Look, overall, they are helpful. We do have some inherent difficulties with the nature of our business, with the administrative requirements of them, of proving the origin. Most of our shipping is with many line items with relatively low value per line item. So there is a lot of effort required into proving the source of origin to enable us to access the free trade agreement. The cases where we're invoicing high value with lower line items, it's more practical. There are some cases where the impracticalities cause us to actually not claim the agreement, that the requirements are too burdensome for the return that we would get.
Would you consider that to be the most challenging part of the trade agreements? I mean, obviously, if the cost exceeds the benefit, that is, of course, a commercial decision that needs to be made.
Yeah, that is absolutely. So if we're trading with countries like New Zealand, we ship zero, no limited requirements in terms of proving origin. There's trust, then it's straightforward. But it's just that workflow. I agree. That's the key impediment.
And in terms of Australia-Indonesia trade under the two agreements that we have, what is your view about the administration in those arrangements? Has that been easier to deal with, or does it represent similar kinds of issues?
Look, I would say there are some countries that are easier than Indonesia. In general, that would be similar to a lot of other countries, but there are some regions that have been easier.
And is that something that is a result of the agreement having declarations rather than certificates, things like that? Is it a structural thing, or is it the customer service in country A is easier to deal with than country B?
It's the level of proof required. In many cases, we're able to make a declaration that is trusted by the authorities, that we make a declaration in terms of origin. With Indonesia, we're pretty much obliged to prove it, and that becomes quite burdensome, a burden.
From a trade investment perspective, what would you identify as being features that could increase business activity between Australia and Indonesia?
Well, obviously, this free trade agreement is a key area. We've been pleased with our experience in terms of trading, and we can outline that separately. But a lot of the other sorts of issues would be the administrative requirements within Indonesia of actually doing business. I don't think that's probably the same for the local operations over there, but for Australian companies, there is a different type of administrative requirement in terms of trading, in terms of the regulations, and if those were eased off, it would make it easier.
And that, of course, for your own business, Ronstan, that would increase your sales and presence and things like that.
Well, look, if we can reduce our cost base in the products and the administrative cost base within, we can sell more products. There's no doubt, and we can do more work in Indonesia, and we can do more sales as a business. So the cost competitiveness for our business is critical.
In terms of, and you sit, and your business sits within a particular niche in economic sectors, your manufacturing, your industrial. What's your broader view of the Australian and Indonesian marketplaces? Are there particular areas of opportunity that you think are underplayed in terms of development? Where are the areas of expansion that you see as a manufacturer?
Look, sorry, I was just thinking for a second there. But in terms, just firstly, we're just making clear we're not doing significant trade into Indonesia. We're using the Batam in Indonesia as a base for selling all around the world. I think when we looked at the opportunities, looked at the decision to move offshore with manufacturing, we did that back in 2013. We found Indonesia met our needs very well, particularly the arrangement in Batam, which is the island near Singapore where we're located. And I think a lot of it would be for Indonesia for the understanding of the opportunities in manufacturing in Indonesia to be clearer to more people. I think a lot of companies will be looking at China, they'll be looking at countries like Thailand, and they won't think Indonesia. And I think for Indonesia to lift its profile in Australia and explain the benefits it has would be important and increase the opportunity for more trade between the two entities.
Andrew.
In terms of setting up your...
Thank you very much to all of our panelists all around the world. We've had 15 speakers so far today. So thank you to the technical team for juggling it all. That is absolutely amazing. But we've come to our last speakers, and I'm inviting our guests up who are actually our hosts for the day. So please, in Melbourne, we've got Bill Cole, who's BDO's Australian partner for international trade and customs, and Indonesia, his counterpart is Iman Ahmad, who's BDO's Indonesian partner for legal services.
Thank you for the speakers for the panel discussion. And now we are moving on to our next agenda. To Pak Eman, please go on to the stage. And the speakers for the panel discussion, thank you very much.
Ya, tarik Bang.
Okay, thank you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon. Australia. Thank you for making your time available to attend this discussion. Actually, I would like to introduce myself. I am Ayman Ahmad of BDO. BDO Legal actually will, in investment will have alignment with the other business unit of BDO in Indonesia, such as tax, and then IT advisory, and then audit and assurance, valuation, and something like that. I think I'll have to start because the time is only 10 minutes. So the next minutes I will share about what the information and the progress in Indonesian regulation on the investment. I think that I have to go to directly to the main issues. Yes, I would like to limit the information on the foreign investment and international trade. So as already mentioned before, that Indonesia have so many business potencies in maybe such as in manufacture. We have the infrastructure, mining and energy, renewable energy. Because Indonesia, as one of the member states of the Sustainable Development Goals initiative, which has already held in New York in 2015, and already endorsed by Indonesian government by the presidential decree number 15 on of 2017. That's why I think the renewable energy and mining, infrastructure, manufacture has to follow the sustainable development goals. Yeah, especially I think Indonesia also have the issue on the ESG. Yeah, nowadays I think it will be very popular in Indonesia, and then I think also can be used as the one of the tools for the investment or for the financial instrument like the carbon trading. And then for the food and agro-agriculture, as I mentioned before, that I think Indonesia has a lot of opportunities on there. And then also the blue economic, like say the fishery and other things. For the food and agriculture industry, I think that you, as mentioned before, that I think it's very important also to know about the regulation in Indonesia, not only the investment, but also the what Ibu Regina has raised before, that the IPR is also important. Yeah. So I think we have also the experience on that, and I think it will be one of the things that we have to be considered before doing business in Indonesia. That we have to make sure whether your IPR already protected, and in Indonesia or and other countries. Indonesia actually have the investment opportunities divided into 4 areas, yeah, priority sectors, one national strategy programs, priority investment, and economic zone. And then the priority sectors will be have the criteria on the national strategy program project, and manpower intensive, expert oriented, capital intensive, advanced technology, industry pioneer, and oriented towards research and development and innovation activities. I think that I have to skip this because only the what we call it as the regulation, yeah, the incentive like fiscal and non-fiscal. Maybe you already know about this. And then the important things I have to know that nowadays in Indonesia we do not have to check the what we call as the negative list anymore, because we already have the new regulation on the investment business activities under the president regulation. So this is really different in the previous regulation. We only there is no closed business fields. Yeah, so now we can do the business based on the priority business fields, and the receive business fields only for the medium, small, and micro, medium, small enterprise. And also there is the business field open with the certain requirements. And then the economic zone as the one of the incentive that government has already provided is to have the facility like tax incentive, infrastructure and logistics, and the diversity, resources and labor costs and skill level. This is the zone there, like the special economic zones, industrial estates, free trade zone, and bonded zone, bonded logistics center, and priority tourism destination is one of the area that I would like to be built in Indonesia. I mean, to be improved, like to open a new Bali. Yeah. So like the Toba Lake, maybe Mandalika, and then other like the Wakatobi. And for doing business in Indonesia, you have to have the foreign investment issues. What it is legal entity, not only legal entity. I mean, there is the two kind of entity that can do business in Indonesia. One is permanent establishment, and the second one is foreign investment company. The type of permanent establishment, there is based on asset type, activity type, and agent type, and insurance type. What is the difference between the permanent establishment and the foreign investment company is the permanent establishment only the entity is established in other countries. And then PT-PMA, as you might know, I think the foreign capital investment company in Indonesia, there is the requirement, the new requirement is there is a minimum investment value, 10 billion rupiah, yeah, minimum, yeah, should be the paid capital. Some of my experience, some of the investor, maybe it might be the input for the government. They think that is too high, yeah, but maybe government has the certain policy how to help this matter, yeah. And then about the business licenses, there is the basic requirements. So you might not maybe about the business license, but there is the license based on the risk. Yeah. So if we choose the business procedure in Indonesia, then we have four category. The first is law. Law only have one business identity, and the medium law have the business identity and standard certificate, and then the medium height have the business identity and standard certificate, and the height is business identity permit that must be approved by the other ministry or the local government, and also the standard certificate if required. The challenge on investment in Indonesia, this will be the most focus on this, because nowadays, actually, as I mentioned before, that Indonesia has the umbrella law, yeah, in the form of omnibus. But I think because of there is the what we call it as the drastic changes on the regulation, so sometimes the implementing regulation cannot follow the higher regulation. So sometimes there is regulation that cannot be synchronized with the other regulation. Also, there is the issue on the capital, as I mentioned before. Yeah. But for the investment is made in the special economic zone, there will be the certain treatment. And other things about the single purpose, because for the foreign investment company, some of the company must only have one single purpose company. It will be the issue on how if the company has to have the another business related to the main business, main purpose. Can do they to have in one company to different business line on. And then there is also the regulation on the Indonesian majority. There is the requirement of there is the national capital must remain larger than before. Okay, about the international trade, there is the international trade, as I mentioned, I think between the government and between the individuals and between the government and individuals and the government and the country. So what is the barrier? Or I would like to not to say the barriers, but only the challenges. The challenges in international trade will be, as mentioned before, that there is tariff or tax on goods, and then the quota, and the export-import regulation, and the foreign exchange restriction. So I think that that's to our experience in BDO, that we can also have assisted the foreign company to do this trade by not change, but to adjust the regulation on import. So export and import, and then they can do with the government, have the discussion with the government how to cope with the matters of the import regulation. I think because of the times I have to finish the explanation here. So thank you for patiently listen what I have to say. Thank you.
Also in the presence, of course, of some very well-regarded speakers. So as I was sitting there thinking about what I'd put together over the last few days, I thought I might try and lighten the burden of this and give you something, some of my own insights before I get into the nitty-gritty. My first observation is that many years ago, a lecturer of mine described trade as the place where business, the law, and economics collide. And we've had a lot about business. We've had a fair bit about economics. I'm left with the law, the border law. And in moving into that space, I suppose I would like to make some general observations about the nature of our trade agreements and possibly our policy settings, although we've had some good evidence that's helpful. And what I'm getting at is that in general, international trade and trade law, trade arrangements are first and foremost formulated around economies. So the contradiction in our trade agreements is that they are aimed, and particularly the modern agreements that seek to create full economic links rather than just the movement of goods between countries, is that they are based around countries. And within that, the economies tend to be represented by the interests of large companies, large capital formations, industries with high capital and automation requirements, mining, heavy chemicals, things like that. So at a global level and at a national level, we still find ourselves, I suppose, looking at the big end of town. The problem, of course, with that logic is that economies don't trade, governments don't trade, businesses trade, and the ones who provide the most economic benefit, of course, are the small and medium-sized enterprises. We find ourselves still in global trading environments where, as much as there are excellent initiatives around SMEs, they typically rely on some provision of information or some kind of generic approach to providing in principle support. Obviously, a layer down, we have industry groups underneath who take it on themselves to provide direct support to SMEs and businesses in their economic activities between countries. But it seems to me that there needs to be a significant shift in thinking in order to allow SMEs to prosper. They prosper by finding growth paths. The growth paths for Australian businesses, for instance, are offshore. We're a small we're a small population in a significant economy, and the cake internally for a whole range of technologies and buying and selling opportunities just aren't there. Scale cannot be achieved for many businesses in Australia. We need to look outwards. How we look outwards and how any SME, Indonesia to Australia, Australia to Indonesia, the mode that is adopted in advancing to a growth path may differ. So we have plenty of examples of businesses, particularly in Australian agriculture, selling goods at the farm gate, and that's considered to be trade. Well, I dispute that. The fact is that trade is the ability of businesses to move up the supply chains, down the supply chains, hopefully, ultimately, foreign direct investing in their destination markets, but certainly moving down supply chains where they capture more margin, they have greater understanding of the markets and the mechanisms of international trade. They grow economically, but they grow in terms of technique and understanding of trade. We need trading businesses. Both our nations need trading businesses. So I urge policymakers and others who have the ability to change the landscape to think more carefully about how they assist SMEs. That's where our employment comes from. That's where our opportunities for growth arise. What else? Entry into international trade. We'll keep that motif. The idea of risk. It's been mentioned a couple of times by some of the speakers. The understanding and measurement of risk is fundamental to a business decision to enter international trade. These are foreign markets. You have long distances or shorter distances of international transport and insurance. There's a whole range of uncertainties, but the fact is that businesses in both our countries have confronted these problems in the past. I recall very strongly the first moves into China when it opened up. Businesses took a risk that in some instances took a decade to recoup the costs and the efforts that they put in, but it was rewarded ultimately with greater market share, more profits, etc. The prospect for Indonesian businesses in Australia and Australian businesses in Indonesia bear none of the problems that were experienced with the opening of China. Another example, none of these markets are as difficult as those circumstances. So great hurdles have already been overcome. And that vision combined with a sensible approach to risk, I think, are some of the, if you like, business cultural aspects that need to be pushed forward in our various business communities. And yes, we do need policy settings around these things, but ultimately, I think the business to business, business groups to business group approach is the way of familiarising businesses with new markets and getting confidence in how they address global markets. I might turn to my slides now. The economic features and the rest of this presentation, ladies and gentlemen, are purely about, if you like, some of the checklists that need to be addressed by business entering the Australian market. Nothing on this slide should surprise anyone. We understand all the statistics. There are, and for convenience sake, I've grouped some of the issues for trading businesses into Australia into three buckets: the importing regulations, duty and taxes, so that's the financial aspect, and finally the structural considerations of how you conduct your trade. In terms of the importing regulations, obviously in Australia, island nation, renowned for the strictness of its biosecurity and other laws. It is probably for an Indonesian firm a significant barrier to entry. So understanding the requirements of our quarantine system, hugely important, particularly given Indonesia is a fundamentally tropical country. The controls are always applied quite strictly. Rules of origin, certificates of origin, obviously we've spoken a lot about trade agreements now, and all of the benefits that flow from them really rely on goods qualifying under those agreements. Packing and labelling rules, again, Australia has very strict regimes about the what goes onto supermarket shelves, what is expressed in description, contents, and origin on those labels. The duties and taxes. Australia maintains a relatively low general duty rate. We have under ISCBA zero rates on, I think, 99% of goods traded. We still have GST requirements under all our agreements, so the goods and services tax is omnipresent. It applies to all transactions at the border. We maintain in our agreements in Australia the body of contingent protection rules, anti-dumping, countervailing duties and charges, which are meant to put extra taxes on anti-competitive pricing. The functional presence aspects, structure is very important in international trade. I've already mentioned the idea of selling at the farm gate or selling FOB. That's an exporting activity, even up to the port in the opposite country. Once you go past that, of course, you start talking about having taxable presences in your destination market in Australia or Indonesia. And of course, that brings you into, if you like, domestic regimes of control and taxation, which are far more complex. Now, that's appropriate, of course, depending on your strategy and vision. Are you going to not only produce goods, export them to the destination country and be responsible for storing and distributing them? If that's the case, then you start talking about having a presence in the other country. You need to control those things directly. Anything less than that, of course, you have the ability to use service providers and progressively reduce your exposure to foreign taxation, etc. Slide, please. In terms of pure investment, we have a few key aspects in Australia that must be considered. We've got a foreign investment review board. So for significant investment in infrastructure, farmland, major businesses, etc., the Foreign Investment Review Board requires applications and approvals. It's a study in itself. I just really wanted to note it to you so that you consider it when you are performing a strategic exercise. My colleague Emin has already flagged a lot of these sectors in terms of available opportunities. They're probably of themselves massive areas of growth. We've had Helen already speak about the human capital mobilisation programs. The blue economy. The blue economy is an interesting one. I think it's very relevant to some of the geopolitical comments that have been made earlier in the day. The development of marine infrastructure, trading routes, efficient and timely supply chain opportunities that reduce the cost of the movements of goods and people between the two economies. I think it's probably fundamental for further development. We have to do more, not just in Northern Australia, but elsewhere in terms of increasing the efficient, effective links between our two nations. As I said at the start, trade's the collision of business, law and economics. Business is a social activity. And to get that right, we need the exchange of business people as well as goods. Next, please. This is the current agreement that we've been speaking about pretty much all through the presentations today. There is, of course, the ANSFER agreement, which was a precursor for the whole of Southeast Asia. Along with the IACIPA, which is a whole of economy agreement, the ANSFER is also a useful trading goods agreement that must also form part of the strategic thinking of businesses considering Australia or Indonesia. Good old rules of origin. We don't seem to be able to get rid of those in terms of our free trade agreements. They, you heard a speaker earlier talking about it being a major difficulty in I suppose, his business life. And the fact is that understanding where your goods sit in terms of the various rules, you'll see rules that pertain to things that are entirely made in a place of originating goods. Other goods are made from a collection of local labour, materials, imported materials, and other imports. Sounds like global business, doesn't it? International trade. You have to pick and choose and apply these correctly in order to gain the benefits of the agreements. So that's a good strategic exercise also for your business in the first steps. Next, please. I thought this is probably again a useful starting tool for businesses, and that is to just consider the kinds of things that accrue at the border. We've spoken about free trade agreements and tariffs, etc. But the controls of the Department of Agriculture are significant. It could mean the difference between your goods getting to a market or being stuck in a fumigation chamber or being re-exported because they don't conform. So it's a very, very serious consideration. The commerce markings and product approvals. Australia has, as Indonesia does, a regime of prohibitions and restrictions on goods. So you need to understand whether your food product that contains, for instance, benzoene as a form of preservative is allowed in Australia, because it won't be. It goes down to the level of the ingredients often. So the labelling and contents is very, very important. It's also worth noting that we've got a significant regime around tracking transactions in Australia. So the passage of funds, international currency transfers, etc., is reported on. And in some instances where cash is coming in with individuals, there needs to be individual reporting. So these things are worth considering. And there's our disclaimer, so don't rely on anything I've said. Thank you for your attention, and I'll now hand over to Andrew to join me in thanking the event. Our discussion has just been about the questions and answers that were planned. We've run out of time, but I think we'll attempt to take on board any written or emailed questions and respond to those over time if that suits the audience. I think obviously there's been a lot of content today that might raise questions. Yes, please contact us and we shall respond.
Fantastic. Thank you to Bill. Thank you to BDO. Thank you to all our speakers. Now it's time for us to wrap things up, break into our separate areas, exchange business cards, exchange emails, and then hopefully exchange goods and services between the two countries. And and finance as well. Thank you, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of our event. On behalf of BDO in Indonesia and Australia, I would like to express our gratitude to all the speakers, moderators, the guests, and all participants at today's event. We really hope that all the information and discussion will be beneficial to your career and your business. For the questions, we will put a contact person or email after the closing of this event, so you can submit your question there. I'm Sessa as the MC for today's event. Farewells. Please enjoy the lunch. Good afternoon, and see you at our next events. Thank you.